Is it better to be feared or loved? Welcome back. This is D Average, and today I present my very surface level review of The Prince, published in 1515 by Niccolo Machiavelli, 136 years before Hobbes' Leviathan, and 2.5 centuries before Spirit of Laws or the American Revolution. So, which is better, to be feared or to be loved? Niccolo wrote 3 quotes that I've paraphrased together. Whether it be better to be loved than feared or feared than loved, it may be answered that one should wish to be both. But because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it's much safer to be feared than loved. Nevertheless, a prince ought to inspire fear in such a way that if he does not win love, he avoids hatred, because he can endure very well being feared whilst he is not hated, which will always be as long as he abstains from the property of his citizens and subjects and from their women. It is necessary for him to be sufficiently prudent that he may know how to avoid the reproach of these vices, which would lose him his state. So here Niccolo promotes that a prince ought to be both feared and loved, but when an extreme situation arises, fear is the safer option. Furthermore, a prince should not behave or commit actions that result in him being hated, since that is the first step to losing the state. Hatred stems from violation of property, women, and unjustified execution of other men. However, these behaviors are necessary because Niccolo claims men in general are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous. Fear of punishment never fails. Ultimately, fear is safer than love, although try to accomplish both, endeavor to avoid hatred. This reminds me of a lesson Hobbes touched upon in Leviathan. Hobbes also acknowledged that fear of punishment was a necessary tool in the social contract and state stability. Moving on, a virtuous monarch or leader ought to be clement or merciful, generous, compassionate, faithful, bold, and brave, affable, chaste, sincere, easy, religious, etc., as opposed to rapacious or extremely greedy, cruel, faithless, or unbelieving, effeminate and cowardly, haughty or prideful, lascivious, hard, grave, frivolous, etc. A prince ought to proceed in a temperate manner with prudence and humanity, so that too much confidence may not make him incautious, and too much distress render him intolerable. Here's that fine line a king, queen, prince, or princess has to walk between being virtuous, too friendly, and thus losing stability. To paraphrase some more, therefore it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. To appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, upright, and to be so, but with a mind so framed that should you require not to be so, you may be able and know how to change to the opposite. So this might be the root of trust issues. Here, Niccolo promotes a facade of these ideal characteristics, but then the leader must be able to switch them off for the survival of the state. It might not be that bad. An honorable leader may have to switch off honorable behavior depending on the situation, or this honorable behavior could be a facade for an evil person. Machiavelli has a chapter where the prince ought to beware of flatterers, since their advice or scheming can be a source of corruption. And Charles Montesquieu wrote that sentences passed by the prince would be an inexhaustible source of injustice and abuse. The courtiers, by their importunity, would always be able to extort his decisions. To counter this potential corruption, Niccolo advises, a prince therefore ought always to take counsel, but only when he wishes and not when others wish. He ought rather to discourage everyone from offering advice unless he asks for it. But, however, he ought to be a constant inquirer and afterwards a patient listener concerning the things of which he inquired. Also, on leaning that anyone, on any consideration, has not told him the truth, he should let his anger be felt. So therefore, a leader, prince, princess, king, or queen inevitably needs an inner circle of various types, but this can be a source of corruption to erode the stability of the state. The monarch needs to be aware of this type of system as natural. Continuing on, the subject of corruption, the whole system of a principality monarchy is toxic and frustrating, and no one should go back to it. For example, there is nothing but fear, jealousy, prospect of punishment to terrify him, but on the side of the prince there is the majesty of the principality, the laws, the protection of friends, and the state to defend him. So to anyone who wants to enter or climb the ladder in that type of system, the person is already suspicious of you, and if you overstep the boundaries, fear tactics and punishment will be used. And it's understandable, since the stability of the state or environment is at risk. Ultimately, the monarch should act virtuously, but be ready to use fear and punishment to keep stability. The ruler must balance an open mind and a calm temperament, but be ready to use fear and display anger. Above all, the endeavor to avoid being hated. Thank you for listening. I'm D Average.